My name is Emma Harrison, and I'm 24 years old. What happened to me last Sunday changed everything I thought I knew about my life. I was sitting at our family dining table, enjoying my mother's famous lasagna, when a text from an unknown number appeared on my phone that would shatter my entire world. The message was simple but terrifying. Get up and leave now. Don't tell your parents anything. My fork trembled in my hand as I stared at the screen. Mom looked up from cutting her portion, her eyes filled with concern. Everything all right, sweetheart? Just work stuff. I lied, my voice barely steady. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't even have a job at the moment, having been laid off from the marketing agency 3 weeks ago. Sunday dinners had always been sacred in the Harrison household. My parents, Robert and Linda, had maintained this tradition for as long as I could remember. Even after I'd moved back home following my job loss, these weekly gatherings felt like the one constant in my increasingly unstable life. But tonight felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite place. Dad kept checking his watch, and Mom seemed unusually nervous, dropping her napkin twice and spilling wine on the tablecloth. I'd attributed their behavior to stress about my unemployment situation, but now I wondered if there was something more. Another text arrived. There's a silver Honda waiting at Miller Street corner. You have 3 minutes. My blood ran cold. I excused myself to the bathroom, my legs barely supporting me as I climbed the stairs. Once locked inside, I pulled back the curtain and peered out the window. Sure enough, a silver Honda sat at the corner, engine running, exhaust visible in the cold evening air. This was insane. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was a prank or a case of mistaken identity. But something deeper, some instinct I'd never acknowledged before, told me the danger was real. Fragments of memories began surfacing, strange inconsistencies I'd dismissed over the years. The way my parents tensed whenever police cars drove by. How we'd moved 3 times during my childhood for reasons that never quite made sense. The fact that I had no grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins, unusual for most families, but my parents always claimed we were just a small family. There were no baby photos of me before age 4, something I'd questioned once, but was told they'd been lost in a house fire. I flushed the toilet for appearances and returned to the dining room, my mind racing with possible explanations for what was happening. Sorry about that, I said, forcing a smile. Actually, I just remembered I promised to meet Sarah tonight. She's having some kind of emergency with her apartment. Mom's fork stopped midway to her mouth. But we haven't had dessert yet. I made your favorite chocolate cake. Rain check. I grabbed my purse, trying to appear casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. Dad stood abruptly. I'll drive you. It's getting late. No need, really, I insisted, moving toward the door. Sarah's place isn't far. But Mom had positioned herself between me and the exit, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Let me at least pack some dinner for you to take. Their behavior was setting off every alarm bell in my head. The way they were trying to delay me, the strange look that passed between them when they thought I wasn't watching. Actually, I forgot something upstairs, I said, backing toward the staircase. Be right back. Instead of going to my room, I slipped into my parents' bedroom and looked out their window, which faced the backyard. The wooden fence had a gate leading to the alley behind our house, a potential escape route I'd used to sneak out as a teenager. I could hear my parents talking in urgent, hushed tones downstairs, but couldn't make out the words. My phone buzzed again. 2 minutes. Move now. This was madness, but something deep in my gut told me to trust these messages. I quietly opened my parents' bedroom window and climbed onto the small roof over our back porch. From there, I dropped to the ground, wincing at the impact, and ran across the yard. The gate squeaked as I opened it, and I froze, listening for any sign that I'd been heard. When no one came, I sprinted down the alley and around the block, staying in the shadows. The silver Honda was still there, and as I approached, the passenger window rolled down. A woman with short dark hair and sharp eyes looked at me intently. Emma Harrison? She asked. I nodded, too breathless to speak. Get in. We need to leave immediately. Every safety lesson I'd ever learned screamed against getting into a stranger's car, but as I heard my father's voice calling my name from somewhere behind me, I made my choice. I yanked open the door and jumped inside. "Drive," I gasped. The woman, Agent Martinez, as she introduced herself, accelerated smoothly away from the curb. "Seatbelt," she said calmly, checking her mirrors. "We have a lot to discuss." As we drove through the familiar streets of my hometown, Agent Martinez began explaining the impossible. "Your real name is Emma Collins. The people you know as Robert and Linda Harrison are not your biological parents. You've been in witness protection for the past 20 years. I laughed, a high, slightly hysterical sound. "This is insane. You've got the wrong person. Your biological parents were Marcus and Jennifer Collins," Martinez continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Your father was a forensic accountant who discovered evidence of massive money laundering by the Volkov crime family. When he testified against them, your entire family was placed in witness protection." "This doesn't make sense," I protested, my head spinning. "If they were protecting me, why would they suddenly become dangerous?" Martinez's expression grew grim. "Because they've been compromised. We've been monitoring suspicious activity around her case for the past 6 months. Robert Harrison has been in contact with known Volkov associates." She handed me a manila envelope. Inside were surveillance photos showing my father meeting with men I'd never seen before in parking lots and diners. There were also transcripts of phone conversations discussing finalizing arrangements and completing the transaction. "The transaction," Martinez said quietly, "is you, Emma. The Volkovs have finally tracked down the witness protection families from your father's case. They're systematically eliminating loose ends." My hands shook as I stared at the photos. The man I'd called Dad for 20 years, talking casually about handing me over to criminals. "Why now?" I whispered. "Money," Martinez replied bluntly. "The Harrisons have been struggling financially. Robert made some bad investments, and they're facing foreclosure. The Volkovs offered them a way out in exchange for delivering you." We drove to a safe house, a modest apartment in the next town over. Agent Martinez explained that I would be temporarily relocated while they dealt with the immediate threat. "But first, there was something I needed to know. The locket you always wear," Martinez said, pointing to the silver heart pendant around my neck. "That belonged to your biological mother. She gave it to you before you entered protection." I'd worn the locket every day since I could remember. The Harrisons had told me it was a family heirloom, but I'd never been able to open it. Martinez showed me how to press a hidden mechanism, and the locket opened to reveal not a photo, but a tiny data chip. "Your father hid crucial evidence in this locket," she explained. "Financial records, communications, and testimony that could destroy what remains of the Volkov organization. They've been searching for this evidence for 20 years. The next few days passed in a blur of debriefings and preparations. I learned about my real parents. Marcus had been killed in a car accident 5 years ago, but Jennifer was still alive, living under a new identity in Oregon. The Harrisons had been told of their deaths to prevent me from asking questions. The hardest part was accepting that the people who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me through heartbreaks, had been planning to betray me. Agent Martinez arranged for me to confront them, under controlled circumstances, before their arrest. They met me at a coffee shop, both looking haggard and nervous. When I walked in, Linda's face crumpled with what appeared to be genuine relief. "Emma, thank God," she said, reaching for me. "We've been so worried." I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "I know," I said simply. Robert's face went pale. "Know what, honey?" "I know about the Volkovs. I know about the witness protection program. I know you were planning to hand me over." The mask slipped then. Linda's maternal concern evaporated, replaced by cold calculation. Robert straightened, his defensive posture abandoned. "You don't understand the situation," Robert said. "These people don't make idle threats. It was either you or all of us." "Was any of it real?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my determination to stay strong. Linda looked away.
"Some of it. You were a sweet child. But this was always a job, Emma."
"We're not your parents." The finality of those words hit harder than any physical blow. 20 years of bedtime stories, birthday celebrations, and family vacations, all professional obligations. Federal agents moved in then, and I watched as the people who'd raised me were handcuffed and led away. Neither looked back. 6 months later, I stood in Jennifer Collins' kitchen in Portland, Oregon, watching a woman who shared my eyes and smile make tea with trembling hands. My biological mother. "You look so much like your father," she whispered, studying my face as if trying to memorize it. The reunion was awkward and emotional. 20 years was a long time, and we were essentially strangers. But there was something there, a connection I'd never felt with the Harrisons, despite their years of care. "I don't remember much from before," I admitted. "Just fragments." "You were so young," Jennifer said gently. "Only 4 when we entered protection. I used to worry you'd forget us entirely." She showed me photo albums I'd never seen, pictures of myself as a toddler with parents who clearly adored me. Marcus Collins had been tall with kind eyes and my stubborn chin. Jennifer was smaller, with the same hazel eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. "Your father saved every penny to buy you that locket," Jennifer said, touching the pendant I still wore. "He said someday you'd need proof of what really happened." The evidence in my locket had indeed proven invaluable. The Justice Department used it to indict 12 remaining members of the Volkov organization, including their current leader. The threat that had shadowed my family for 2 decades was finally over. The Harrisons received reduced sentences in exchange for their cooperation. I never spoke to them again, but I learned they'd been divorced and were serving their time in separate facilities. Part of me felt sorry for them. They'd been trapped in their assignment as much as I'd been trapped in my false identity. "What happens now?" I asked Jennifer during one of our many long conversations over the following weeks. "Now we get to know each other again," she said simply. "If you want to." I did want to. It wasn't easy. 20 years of separation couldn't be bridged overnight. But slowly, I began to understand who Emma Collins had been before she became Emma Harrison. A child who loved books and animals, who'd been curious about everything and asked endless questions. Some of those traits had survived the identity change, buried but not lost. I decided to keep Emma Harrison as my legal name. It was the identity I'd lived with longest, and changing it again felt like erasing another part of myself. But I hyphenated it. Emma Harrison Collins, honoring both the girl I'd been and the woman I'd become. A year later, I was working at a nonprofit that helped victims of organized crime. My experience, as traumatic as it had been, gave me unique insight into the challenges faced by families in witness protection and those betrayed by people they trusted. Jennifer and I had grown close, talking almost daily and spending holidays together. She'd remarried a kind man named Paul who welcomed me into their family without question. I even had a half-sister, Maya, who was 16 and delighted to finally meet the big sister she'd heard about her whole life. The healing wasn't linear. I still had trust issues and recurring nightmares about that Sunday dinner. But I'd learned something important. Identity isn't just about names or legal documents or even DNA. It's about the choices you make, the values you hold, and the people you choose to love. The Harrisons had raised me, but they hadn't created me. The fundamental core of who I was, my compassion, my sense of justice, my resilience, those things had survived 20 years of deception and emerged stronger. I kept one photo of myself with Robert and Linda Harrison, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. A reminder that people aren't always who they seem, that love can be conditional, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from everything familiar into an uncertain future. But I also kept it as proof of something else, that even in the midst of lies and betrayal, the human capacity for hope and renewal remains. Emma Collins had been lost for 20 years, but she hadn't been destroyed. And Emma Harrison Collins, the woman who emerged from that ordeal, was stronger than either of her predecessors had been alone. The silver Honda that picked me up that Sunday evening had carried me away from everything I thought I knew. But it had also carried me toward the truth, toward my real family, and ultimately, toward myself. Sometimes the text message that changes your life arrives at the most ordinary moment. Sometimes salvation comes from trusting strangers over the people you've loved longest. And sometimes discovering that your entire life has been a lie is the first step toward finding out who you really are. As I write this, sitting in Jennifer's garden while Maya practices piano inside, I think about that moment of choice in the Harrison family dining room. The moment when I had to decide whether to trust my instincts or ignore them for the comfort of familiarity. I'm grateful I chose truth over comfort, reality over illusion. It wasn't an easy path, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who Emma Harrison Collins was: a survivor, a daughter, a sister, and finally, authentically, herself. Sometimes the text message that changes your life arrives at the most ordinary moment. Sometimes salvation comes from trusting strangers over the people you've loved longest. And sometimes discovering that your entire life has been a lie is the first step toward finding out who you really are. As I write this, sitting in Jennifer's garden while Maya practices piano inside, I think about that moment of choice in the Harrison family dining room. The moment when I had to decide whether to trust my instincts or ignore them for the comfort of familiarity. I'm grateful I chose truth over comfort, reality over illusion. It wasn't an easy path, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who Emma Harrison Collins was: a survivor, a daughter, a sister, and finally, authentically, herself. But the story didn't end there, as much as I wished it could have. 3 months after I thought everything was resolved, Agent Martinez contacted me with disturbing news. "We've intercepted communications suggesting there's still a bounty on your head," she informed me during an emergency meeting at a downtown Portland cafe. "Not from the Volkovs, they're finished. But apparently, your father's testimony affected more than one criminal organization." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "The evidence Marcus collected didn't just implicate the Volkovs. There were financial connections to the Romano crime family, based out of Chicago. They've recently learned about the data chip and want it destroyed, along with anyone who's seen its contents." I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. "So this never ends?" "We're working on it," Martinez assured me. "But in the meantime, we need to discuss additional security measures." The security measures turned out to be another relocation. Just as I was beginning to build a real relationship with Jennifer and Maya, I had to disappear again. This time, they created a new identity for me in Denver, Colorado: Emma Walsh, marketing consultant. The separation from my newfound family was devastating. Jennifer cried when I told her, and Maya, who had just started calling me her real sister, refused to speak to me for the last week before I left. "It's not fair," Maya had shouted during our final argument. "I just got you back, and now they're taking you away again." I had no good answer for her. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. Denver was cold and unfamiliar. My apartment was a sterile one-bedroom in a complex full of young professionals who minded their own business. I worked remotely for a marketing firm that specialized in helping small businesses build their online presence. It was mind-numbing work that required no emotional investment, which suited my fragile state perfectly. The isolation was the hardest part. I couldn't form real friendships when I was constantly lying about my past. I couldn't date when I couldn't even tell someone my real name. I existed in a bubble of carefully constructed normalcy that felt more suffocating than protective. 6 months into my Denver exile, I made a decision that Agent Martinez strongly advised against. I started investigating the Romano family myself. Using skills I developed at the nonprofit and research techniques I'd learned in college, I began digging into public records, news articles, and court documents. What I discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The Romano organization was indeed powerful, but they were also under intense federal scrutiny following a series of recent arrests. Their resources were stretched thin, and their leadership was in chaos. The bounty on my head existed, but they lacked the infrastructure to pursue it effectively. More importantly, I discovered that the statute of limitations on several of the charges my father's evidence could support was approaching. If the Justice Department didn't act soon, some of the Romano family's crimes would be legally unprosecutable. I called Agent Martinez with my findings. "Emma, you need to stop this immediately," she said, her voice tight with concern. "You're putting yourself in danger." "I'm already in danger," I replied. But I might be able to end it. If we can get the remaining Romano leaders arrested before the statute of limitations expires, they won't have any reason to hunt me anymore. That's not your job. You're a protected witness, not an active agent. Maybe it's time I stopped being protected and started taking action. What followed were weeks of careful negotiation between me, Agent Martinez, the Denver field office, and federal prosecutors in Chicago. My proposal was simple. I would testify in person about the evidence my father had gathered, providing crucial context that could strengthen the case against the Romanos. In exchange, I wanted this to be the final testimony. No more relocations, no more false identities, no more running. The risks were enormous. Testifying would put me in the spotlight, making me a target not just for the Romanos but for any other criminals who might have been implicated in my father's evidence. But I was tired of living in shadows, tired of being afraid, tired of being separated from the people I loved. The trial was scheduled for the following spring. I spent the winter preparing, working with federal attorneys to understand every detail of my father's evidence and its implications. I also spent time with a new therapist, Dr. Amanda Chin, who specialized in helping trauma survivors reclaim agency in their lives. You're choosing to face your fears rather than run from them, Dr. Chin observed during one of our sessions. That's a significant shift from survival mode to recovery mode. I don't want to survive anymore, I told her. I want to live. 2 weeks before the trial, I received an unexpected visitor in Denver. Maya had convinced Jennifer to drive down from Portland, and they appeared at my apartment unannounced one Saturday morning. You can't keep disappearing on us, Maya said, pushing past me into my apartment. We're family now. That means we stick together, even when it's dangerous. Jennifer was more cautious, but equally determined. I lost 20 years with you. I won't lose any more time because of these criminals. Their presence in Denver violated every security protocol, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, my apartment felt like home instead of a hiding place. We spent the weekend talking about everything, my upcoming testimony, their lives in Portland, our shared memories and separate experiences. Maya showed me photos from her school play, and Jennifer brought a box of items that had belonged to Marcus, my biological father. Among his belongings was a journal he'd kept during the investigation that ultimately led to our family's destruction and salvation. Reading his words was like hearing his voice for the first time in 20 years. Emma is so smart and curious, he'd written in one entry dated just weeks before we entered witness protection. She asks questions about everything. I hope someday I can give her answers to the questions that matter most. I hope she'll understand why I had to do this, even though it means changing everything about our lives. I understand now, Dad, I whispered, touching his handwriting. The trial in Chicago was a media circus. The Romano family case had captured national attention, and my role as a key witness made me temporarily famous in ways I'd never wanted. Security was unprecedented. I was transported to and from the courthouse in an armored vehicle, accompanied by a team of federal marshals. The Romano family's defense attorneys tried every tactic to discredit my testimony, arguing that I was too young to remember the original events and had been manipulated by federal agents. But the evidence spoke for itself. My father's documentation was meticulous, and the financial trails he'd uncovered were impossible to explain away. During my testimony, I looked directly at Vincent Romano Jr., the family's current leader, as I described the evidence his organization had spent 20 years trying to suppress. He stared back with cold hatred, but I didn't flinch. I thought about my father's courage, about Jennifer's years of hiding, about Maya's fierce loyalty, and I found strength I didn't know I possessed. My father collected this evidence because he believed in justice, I told the court. He sacrificed everything, his career, his safety, his life, to make sure these crimes didn't go unpunished. I'm here to finish what he started. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges. Vincent Romano Jr. and 3 of his lieutenants received sentences ranging from 25 years to life in prison. With their leadership eliminated and their organization in shambles, the threat to my family was finally, definitively over. As I left the courthouse for the final time, Agent Martinez walked beside me. "So, what now, Emma Harrison Collins?" she asked, using my hyphenated name for the first time. "Now I go home," I said simply. But which home? That was the question I faced as the adrenaline of the trial faded. I could return to Portland and build a life near Jennifer and Maya. I could stay in Denver, where I'd started to establish routines and professional connections. Or I could go somewhere entirely new and start fresh with no baggage from any of my previous identities. The answer came to me during a phone call with Dr. Chen. "Where do you feel most like yourself?" she asked. The answer surprised me. I feel most like myself when I'm helping other people navigate situations like mine. I decided to return to Portland, but not to hide in suburban anonymity. Instead, I took a job with the Oregon State Attorney General's office, working in their Victim Services Division. My unique background made me invaluable in cases involving witness protection, organized crime, and family trauma. Jennifer and Maya welcomed me back with tears and celebration. We found a house together, a modest 3-bedroom place where I could have my own space while still being part of a family unit. It was the first time I'd lived in a home where everyone knew exactly who I was and loved me anyway. Maya, now 17 and planning for college, had become fiercely protective of our reconstructed family. She started a blog about resilience and identity that gained a surprising following among other young people dealing with family trauma. "You taught me something important," she told me one evening as we worked on homework together at the kitchen table. "You taught me that family isn't just about blood or time. It's about choosing to love someone even when it's complicated." Jennifer had started attending therapy to deal with her own trauma from our decades of separation. We both struggled with guilt, she for not being able to protect me from the Harrisons' betrayal, me for not remembering enough of our early life together. But we were learning to focus on the present rather than dwelling on the lost past. One evening, nearly 2 years after the Romano trial, Jennifer and I were preparing dinner when she brought up a topic we'd been avoiding. "Have you thought about trying to contact the Harrisons?" she asked carefully. The question caught me off guard. Why would I want to do that? Because they were part of your life for 20 years. Love isn't simple, Emma. Even when someone betrays you, the feelings don't just disappear. She was right, of course. Despite everything, I sometimes found myself missing aspects of my life with the Harrisons. Not the lies or the betrayal, but the small, everyday moments that had felt genuine at the time. After much consideration and discussion with Dr. Chen, I decided to write a letter to Linda Harrison. Not to forgive or reconcile, but to find closure for both of us. I kept the letter brief. "Linda, I'm writing to let you know that I'm safe and well. The threats against me have been resolved, and I'm building a good life with my biological family. I want you to know that while I can't forgive the betrayal, I don't hate you. I understand that you were trapped in an impossible situation, and I believe that some of your care for me was genuine, even within the constraints of your assignment. I hope you're finding peace in your current circumstances. I won't be writing again, but I wanted you to know that I'm okay. Emma." I never received a response, and I didn't expect one. The letter was for me, not for her, a way of acknowledging that complex chapter of my life, without being defined by it. My work at the Attorney General's office became increasingly fulfilling. I specialized in cases involving witness protection and organized crime, using my experience to help other families navigate the system. I also testified before state legislative committees about needed reforms to witness protection protocols, advocating for better mental health support and family reunification programs. The work was challenging and sometimes triggering, but it gave my traumatic experiences meaning and purpose. I was no longer just a victim or a survivor. I was an advocate and an expert. On my 27th birthday, Jennifer organized a small celebration at our house. Maya had invited her boyfriend, a sweet kid named Alex who treated her like she was precious. Jennifer's husband Paul was there, along with a few close friends I'd made through work and therapy. As we gathered around the birthday cake, I felt overwhelmed by gratitude. Not for the trauma I'd endured, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but for the resilience I'd discovered, the family I'd found, and the purpose I'd claimed. "Make a wish," Maya instructed as I prepared to blow out the candles. I closed my eyes and thought about everything I'd been through. The terrifying text message that had saved my life. The betrayal that had shattered my world. The courage that had helped me rebuild it. The love that had made it worthwhile. I didn't wish for anything different. Instead, I wished for the strength to help others find their own path through similar darkness. When I opened my eyes, everyone was watching me with expressions of love and support. These people knew my whole story, the traumatic parts and the triumphant ones, and they chose to be part of my life anyway. "What did you wish for?" Alex asked. I smiled, looking around at the faces of my chosen family. I wish to remember this moment exactly as it is. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and Maya had gone to bed, Jennifer and I sat on the front porch, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if none of this had happened?" she asked. I considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But I think I'm becoming the person I was always meant to be, just by a more complicated route. "Your father would be so proud of you," Jennifer said softly. "I hope so. I hope he'd understand that his sacrifice wasn't in vain." He would. Marcus always believed that the truth would eventually prevail, even when it seemed impossible. As I sat there in the peaceful darkness, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The scared 24-year-old who had received that life-changing text message seemed like a different person now. She had been running from truth. I was running toward it. The next morning, I received a call from Agent Martinez, who had become a friend over the years. "I have some news you might find interesting," she said. "The Justice Department is considering you for a civilian advisory position on witness protection reform." Interested? The opportunity would mean traveling, testifying before Congress, and working with federal agencies to improve the system that had both failed and saved me. It would also mean stepping further into the public eye, something I'd grown more comfortable with, but still found challenging. "Let me think about it," I told her. That evening, I discussed the opportunity with Jennifer and Maya. They were both supportive, understanding that this work had become my calling. "You've already helped so many people," Maya pointed out. "This would let you help even more." "But it would mean travel, potentially being away from home a lot," I cautioned. "Home isn't going anywhere," Jennifer assured me. "And neither are we. We'll be here when you get back from changing the world." A week later, I called Agent Martinez back. "I'm interested," I told her. "But I have conditions. I want to work on family reunification protocols, specifically. Too many witness protection families are unnecessarily separated. That needs to change." "I think we can work with that," Martinez replied. "Welcome to federal service, Emma Harrison Collins." 6 months later, I was sitting in a congressional hearing room, preparing to testify about proposed reforms to the federal witness protection program. In the gallery, I could see Jennifer and Maya, who had come to Washington, D.C. to support me. As I began my testimony, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. A terrifying text message had started it all, but every choice since then had been mine. I had chosen truth over comfort, courage over safety, purpose over peace. "Mr. Chairman, committee members," I began, "my name is Emma Harrison Collins, and I have spent 23 years in the Federal Witness Protection Program. I'm here today not as a victim, but as an expert, to share what I've learned about how we can better serve the families who sacrifice everything in service of justice." As I spoke about the need for better mental health support, improved family reunification procedures, and enhanced security protocols, I realized that this was what my father's sacrifice had ultimately been for. Not just to bring criminals to justice, but to make the system better for future families facing similar choices. The text message that had changed my life had led me to this moment, not as someone running from her past, but as someone using it to build a better future for others. The scared young woman who had fled her parents' house that Sunday evening had become an advocate, a survivor, a daughter, a sister, and finally, completely and authentically, herself. After the hearing ended, Maya hugged me tightly. "Dad would be proud," she said, using the word she'd started using for Marcus, even though she'd never met him. "We all would be," Jennifer added, her eyes bright with tears. "You've turned your pain into purpose, Emma. That's the most courageous thing anyone can do." As we walked out of the Capitol building together, I felt a sense of completion I'd never experienced before. The journey that had begun with betrayal and terror had led to truth and service. The family that had been torn apart by lies had been rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and love. I still wore my father's locket, but now it held a photo of our reconstructed family instead of the dated chip that had once made me a target. The evidence that had once threatened my life had been replaced by love that enriched it. That night, in our hotel room overlooking the Potomac River, I wrote in my journal, "Today I testified before Congress about witness protection reform. 3 years ago, I was Emma Harrison, unemployed and living in my fake parents' house. 2 years ago, I was Emma Walsh, hiding in Denver and afraid of my own shadow. Today, I am Emma Harrison Collins, and I know exactly who that is, someone who survived the unimaginable and chose to use that survival to help others." The text message that started this journey said, "Get up and leave now." I did. I left behind lies, betrayal, and false comfort. But I didn't just leave. I walked toward truth, love, and purpose. And I discovered that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the first step toward finding everything you actually need. The next morning, as our flight back to Portland prepared for takeoff, I looked out the window at the city where I'd just testified about my life's work. Somewhere down there, other families were facing impossible choices. Other children were being protected by lies that would someday shatter their worlds. Other survivors were finding the courage to transform their trauma into advocacy. I couldn't save them all, but I could try to make their journeys a little easier, their landings a little softer, their recoveries a little more complete. And that, I thought as the plane lifted into the sky, was a life worth living, not in spite of everything I'd been through, but because of it. The scared woman who had received that text message had thought her life was ending. She was right in a way. That life had ended. But from its ashes, something stronger and more authentic had been born. And that was the greatest victory of all.